I'm going to just tell you a little bit about the features and characteristics of the short answer question. We'll go over a brief overview. Now, first thing, this question type will ask you to respond to a question within a given amount of words. So you'll have a given amount of words, something like no more than 3 words in a number or up to 2 words. There are various directions that you may receive during this question. So you'll have to keep in mind how many words you have to respond with and write. This is something that students believe is a bit difficult because they have to listen out for a certain amount of words. But don't worry, we'll look at this later on in the video. Second, keep in mind that the answers are most likely in order, just like the other question types for the listening exam. This is because you only hear the listening prompt once, and you'll have to make notes as you hear things. So keep in mind it's a bit easier in this regard because you won't have to be listening back and forth or making notes and not knowing exactly what order the information is in. Third, a lot of students get a little bit nervous because they have to come up with the answers. And this is true to a certain extent. You do have to write out the answers. You do not have any options available to you as you would in the matching or multiple choice question types, for example. But you're not just pulling these answers out of thin air. You will hear them in the listening prompt. And I'll show you how our guide will help you listen out for keywords and really use the questions that you have to your advantage. So don't worry so much about this. And so we're going to use the scanning technique to help this point right here. If you know what to listen out for, you won't feel like you have to just come up with answers. You'll have certain keywords that are present in the questions, and we're also going to use the question words to our advantage here. So in the next slide, we'll have a look at question words. Question words are extremely important for the short answer question type. In fact, I would say this is probably the most important aspect that we're going to look at today. So let's just go over question words just to review and make sure that we're all on the same page. All right, here is a lovely guide that you can think of or review before you go ahead and practice the short answer question. This is something you should be preparing for when you go over your grammar or your vocabulary for the exam. Let's just go over this together quickly. So first we have the question word who. Obviously, this is going to be a person or maybe a specific name. A question could be, who developed the equation used in the project, for example. So when you see who, you're looking for a person. This second one here is a common question that I get from students, the difference between what and which. And I would suggest thinking of it in these words here. General versus selection. So when you see what, you're thinking of a general question, something like, what is your favorite color? If someone asks you this, the answer could be really any color. So you have many, many, many options. Which, on the other hand, will ask you to make a selection of some sort. So if somebody asks you, which is your favorite color out of this group, pink or blue? Your answers are either pink or blue. So you're limited in that you have to make a selection. That is the main difference between what versus which, and you may see both on the exam. Third, we have where, and this is a place, so it could be a city or maybe a country or really just any general area. And an example of a question could be, where was the landmark first discovered? Okay, and you'd have to listen for a place in the listening. Then we have when, which is a time. In this case, for the exam, it could be a general time or a period in history, maybe something like a month or a year. And so the question could be, when was the landmark discovered? And you'd have to listen for this information in the prompt. Then we have why, and this is a reason or perhaps a logic behind something, some sort of decision This is actually usually reserved for answers that are more than 2 words long. So it's very rare that you would see this in a one-word answer, short answer question. And an example of this could be going on with the landmark example. Why was the landmark famous in the 1800s, for example? Don't be surprised if you have to write this out within the word limit. So usually this is reserved for 2 or 3 word answers. And lastly, we have this wonderful example here with how versus how many versus how much. Okay, so first let's look at how. How is going to be a method or a way that something is done. This is also reserved for questions that are more than 2 words long, because similar to why, you have to explain something. So an example of this could be, how did the inventor develop the equation? Okay. Now, how many versus how much? You can think of this in terms of countable and uncountable nouns. You should go ahead and review this in your grammar studies because it will help you in this specific question. So let's just review it quickly now. A countable noun is something that can be counted. So for example, 1 chair, 2 chairs. Something that is uncountable cannot be counted with numbers in the traditional sense. So you could use the words maybe some or much in this case, but you can't use numbers. So for example, I couldn't say 1 money, 2 monies. That's incorrect. I also couldn't say 1 information, 2 informations. That's incorrect. These are uncountable nouns, and so I'd have to use much. For countable, I would use many. So if you get a question that says how many, be on the lookout for listening for something that is countable or plural in the traditional sense. And if you have how much, think of something that is uncountable. All right, so this is our general review of question words. This is a brief review. I would encourage you to look at this more in depth if you find that this is something difficult for you, especially in the short answer question. Okay, we are going to use this guide today in our step-by-step example, and I will take you through the 5 steps. Keep in mind the first 3 steps will be done prior to listening, and steps 4 and 5 will be done while you're listening and answering the questions. Now, first off, like any other listening question or any other section of the IELTS exam, you are first going to read the questions. So you're going to have about 20 seconds before the listening prompt is played for the given section, and you need to utilize this time wisely. So you'll need to do these 3 steps within the 20 seconds given to you. And so you can read the questions, make sure you understand what the question is asking you, and as you do that, I would encourage you to underline your key words. So with time and practice, you can combine steps 1 and 2. You can also combine step 3 in this short answer example, but today we'll go through it individually just to make sure that everything is clear. So you're reading the questions, you're underlining the key words, and key words are the words that call out your attention when you are listening. So think of it as helping you with your scanning technique. You're not just listening out for every word that you hear, but you're listening out for specific nouns or ideas or verbs. We'll look at this in our example. And as you do that, you're going to pay attention to your question words. So the words we just looked at. So if you see a who or a which or a how, you already have an idea of what you have to listen for. And this will really help you prepare yourself for the listening. So if you have a why, for example, you will know that you have to write out a reason as opposed to anything else. If you have time, you can even write out the type of word you'll need to listen out for beside the question. So if you think you'll have to listen out for a noun, you could quickly write N by the number just to make sure that you are listening for the correct word. This is not obligatory, but it's just something you could do if you have extra time. Now, as you listen, you're going to take notes on the key information according to your keywords, and your note-taking system will depend on which section you are in for the exam. Now, we'll go over this in the next slide, and we talk a little bit more about this in our overview video, but today we're going to focus on section 2. So section 2 has its own specific note-taking system. And then lastly, of course, you want to be accurate. This means writing the correct amount of words, writing in a clear, legible manner, and making sure that you have answered the questions correctly to the best of your knowledge. All right, let's move on to looking at the section with more detail. Okay, so section 2. Let's just talk about what you can expect to see here. First off, it's going to be a monologue. So this is only one person speaking, and you can expect to hear a lot of information from just one speaker. Now, keep in mind, when it comes to sections 2 and 4, they're both monologues, but section 2 is considered easier because you have information about a general topic. Section 4 is more abstract, so it's more of an educational topic, might be harder to follow. This is more of a general topic on an everyday situation. An example could include giving directions to a museum or explaining a trip, but remember, it's just one person. In any case, it can still be a bit difficult because you might lose track. So you might maybe zone out if it's not particularly interesting to you. And we're going to help you not do this. And the best way to do that is by keeping outline notes. Now, this is basically just an outline that works for you with different points that the speaker says. And the points that you are writing should adhere to your keywords. That's why keywords are so important. You'll know exactly what to listen for, and you can make notes here that will help you answer the questions. This outline does not have to be anything formal. It doesn't have to be wordy, and I would encourage you to find something that works for you. Today, I will take notes in an outline fashion, and I'll do it in a way that is easy for me with abbreviations and some symbols, and you can follow along and see if that works for you as well. Remember, your note-taking skills for each various question type will largely depend on the section you are in. All right, let's get started with our example. Okay, now on the left-hand side, you will see the section 2 questions. So today we'll be looking at questions 11 to 16. And we have our instructions here: no more than 3 words and or a number. So numbers may be part of our answers. We're not quite sure yet, but we know that we can write no more than 3 words and or a number. That's great to keep in mind. Now, on the right-hand side, I will be writing my outline as we are listening to the exam. But first, we're going to utilize our 20 seconds after the instructions are given to underline our keywords and read our questions. And then we're going to focus on the question words. Now, I would encourage you to combine steps 1 and 2, so read and underline. But for today, let's read first and then underline afterwards, just so that everything is clear. First, I will play the introduction that you would hear during the exam.
You will hear an extract from a talk given to a group who are going to stay in the UK.
Okay, so we know a brief idea of the topic. It's a group that's going to study in the UK. Like I said earlier, it's a general topic, so it should be a bit easier of a monologue than something you would see in section 4. So let's go ahead and just read the questions first. We'll start here. What 2 factors can make social contact in a foreign country difficult? The second one, which types of community group does the speaker give examples of? Here, we already see theater. Now, this is a great clue because we see that there are 3 answers here, one of which has been filled in. So obviously, theater will be an excellent keyword for us. And the third one, in which 2 places can information about community activities be found? Okay, so let's go ahead now and underline our keywords. We'll also focus on the questions. So here I see what, and This is great. I know we're going to be looking for something or a noun. And to is an excellent keyword because I know that we have two factors, so two things. I would not necessarily underline factors because it could be a synonym for things, and the speaker probably won't explicitly mention factors. So we just know we're looking for two things. Social contact would be a great keyword, and foreign country is excellent because we know students will be studying in a different land, and of course, difficult. This is an adjective that will describe social contact. In this case, since we're looking at what, we can rest assured that we'll be looking for two factors or two things. So I'll just put that here and we can make this bold for our notes. Now in your own notes, instead of writing out two, you could write two. You could even just write two things. And if you want, you could also write something like a noun. In this case, I'll write an N. This might even be easier for you with pen and paper. I'm on a computer, so it might take me a bit more time. Okay, let's go to the second question here. We see which. So we see our famous what versus which. Here we can expect to be looking at a specific type of thing. And in this case, it's community group. So types of community group. And the speaker will give an example of these. These are the key words here, which and community group. Of course, theater is already a keyword as well because the speaker will mention theater. Now, this is a little bit tricky even though it's helpful. Keep in mind that these answers can come in any order. So the speaker might mention theater before or after the two other community groups. We'll see if the speaker mentions theater beforehand, but we should not be 100% sure that theater will come first, because these answers can come in any order. This is also helpful for you as a test taker because if you write one answer in number 11, it could also go in number 12 in this case. So you do not have to write the answers the order that you hear them. Even though that might be easier, you won't necessarily lose points for writing the answers for 11 and 12 in a certain order. And of course here we could write two types of groups. Again, same thing, you could write two very quickly. You could even just write two groups if that's easier for you because you know that which is specific. Okay, the last one. In which two places? So here are a lot of keywords. We have two places and it's connected with in which. So we know it's going to be a specific place. Can information about community activities be found? So we're looking for types of community activities in which places. So I would say here we're looking for in two places, and in is a nice clue for us here because it's going to be in something. So it could be like a magazine or a newspaper maybe, or a given physical place. We're not quite sure, but it's a nice idea to keep in mind. All right, so here are our three questions, okay? Our 6 potential answers. And with time and practice, you should be able to do this quickly, all at the same time, multitasking, paying attention to the question words. Before we hear the prompt, let's just go over a couple of things. Now, this example is actually quite difficult because each of the 3 groups contain answers that are nouns. And this means that numbers and names are most likely not going to be used. And so we won't be able to listen out for specific pronouns or specific names. Listening for nouns is actually quite difficult. So it will force us to be on high alert because there will be many nouns played in the listening, but we'll have to really keep these keywords in mind. Now, notice how these questions are also in an outline format. You see there are bullet points and there are 3 headings. This is excellent. We should use this to our advantage. The fact that this outline format is being used in the Section 2 listening is not a coincidence. This is just an example of how Section 2 can really utilize an outline format. So pay attention to how I write and see if it makes sense with the format given in the questions. And last thing, remember that the introduction and the instructions told us that the topic would involve community groups and foreign countries and community activities. So by listening to the instructions and from observing the keywords, we're already one step ahead of other test takers who have just listened blindly or not done this prep work. So even these 20 seconds of preparation work can make a world of difference. All right, so let's go ahead and listen. I would encourage you to make your own outline notes as we listen, and you can also observe mine to see if this helps you.
Good evening and welcome to the British Council. My name is John Parker and I've been asked to talk to you briefly about certain aspects of life in the UK before you actually go there. So I'm going to talk first about the best ways of making social contacts there. Now, you might be wondering why it should be necessary. After all, we meet people all the time. But when you're living in a foreign country, it can be more difficult, not just because of the language, but because customs may be different. If you're going to work in the UK, you will probably be living in private accommodation, so it won't be quite so easy to meet people. But there are still things that you can do to help yourself. First of all, you can get involved in activities in your local community. Join a group of some kind. For example, you'll probably find that there are theatre groups who might be looking for actors, set designers, and so on. Or if you play an instrument, you could join music groups in your area. Or if you like the idea of finding out about local history, there'll be a group for that too. These are just examples. And the best place to get information about things like this are either the town hall or the public library. Libraries in the UK perform quite a broad range of functions nowadays. They're not just confined to lending books, although that's their main role, of course.
Wow. Now, I really love this example because I think it's so clear how helpful an outline can be in section 2. And in this case, it also helps us with our short answer question. So let's go ahead and look at the answers. If you're following along, you may notice that the answers are written here. Now, if I were taking the test, I would actually write these answers directly into the spaces here. We're very lucky that this section 2 question already provided us with an outline. So if I were an actual test taker, I probably wouldn't make a separate outline in this case. I would probably make notes in the margins here, and I may not have used these numbers here. I would have just written them in the spaces provided. But I still would use an outline fashion here and an outline note-taking system. I just did this here on the side to give you a better idea of how to organize an outline if the questions were not so clear-cut and so nicely organized for us. In any case, let's go over the answers. Now, it came in order, which was very helpful for us, and I'm going to paste the transcript of what we heard right here under the outline so that we can use it to explain the answers. All right, and here we are. I've also already put some of the helpful statements in red, but we'll go over this all together. All right, so first off, we see the 2 factors that can make social contact in a foreign country difficult. And here in my outline, I've written SC for social contact, the reasons why, and diff for difficult. And I had here language and customs. And these are exactly the correct answers. Now, see here how I have 11 and 12. They can be in any order. So feel free to write language as number 11 or customs as number 11. It really doesn't matter as long as they're in the correct section. It also matters, though, that you have spelled them correctly and that they are clear and legible. And so basically, the speaker goes right into it and says he talks about the best way of making social contacts. This is a key word in our question. And it says when you're living in a foreign country, it can be more difficult. We have difficult, the key word, not just because. Now, this is an excellent phrase that you will probably see on the exam. Not just because is meant to trick you. The fact that you see not makes students think that it's negative and that it is not the answer, but it's a very common way to introduce 2 things. So it's not just because of the language, but also because of the customs. So be on the lookout for these phrases because they are meant to trick you. And the speaker here introduces language and customs. Perfect. Now, number 13 and 14. Earlier, we talked about how theater may or may not be the first in the list in the series of answers. And in this case, it actually was first. So it helped us out in this case. And the speaker says here, you can get involved in activities in your local community. Great keyword here as well. Group, another keyword here. So we listened out for this. And interestingly enough, he actually did say, for example. So this is great. You can see that the examples are going to be given here. Theater was first, and so we can check that off. And then the speaker talked about music groups. This is something I wrote, and also local history. Now, music groups is right here. So if you play an instrument, you could join music groups, and also local history. There will be a group for that too. Now, technically, we have no more than 3 words. So you could technically write music groups, but groups is not obligatory. Same thing with local history. So you have local history and groups would still be correct because you're still within your word limit, but it isn't obligatory. Now, this actually confuses students quite a lot because they're not sure whether or not they will be marked incorrect for not including groups. Here are a couple of things that you can use to think about this. If adding it is still within your word limit, I would add it just to be sure. But you notice here that theater does not have group attached to it. And group is already in the question. So it's obvious that music is a group and that local history is a group. That is why it is not obligatory. So think of it this way. Words like articles such as the or an are not necessarily obligatory because they don't make a difference in the answer. Also, words that are listed in the question, so in this case, group, they're not necessarily obligatory, but you'll notice that you can include them and they're usually always within the word limit. Also, this no more than 3 words and or a number direction is actually the most difficult one because it leaves many options. So if it had 2 words, you would use, for example, just local history and just music because local history groups would be incorrect since it's over 2 words. But keep in mind when you have this type of direction, you're more than likely going to be faced with the option of whether or not to include these extra words. You won't be marked incorrect for not including them, and you won't be marked incorrect for including them. So if it fits within the limit, I would advise including them just to make sure that you have checked all your boxes. We'll see this again in numbers 15 and 16. So we see this here. I wrote quite simply information. So the keyword that we saw here, information, I just wrote info. And in 2 places, so in the town hall and in the library. And you could see here the speaker explicitly stated in the town hall or the public library. So same idea here with these question words. You have a lot of options here. So you could say the, also you could say public, and you could say library. Or you could even say libraries, okay? The plural is also correct in this case because later on the speaker says libraries in the UK perform quite a broad range of functions. So since both are mentioned, both are actually fair game in this case. And this is actually quite a nice gift that the IELTS exam has given us. The fact that they say libraries immediately after library would make both of them correct. What is not necessarily obligatory is the article the or public. This describes the library. So if we eliminate the and public, library and libraries still fulfills the requirements for the question and for the instructions. But adding the library or the public library or even just public library would still be correct because you're still within your 3-word limit and it still fulfills the question. So you have all these options here for number 15 or number 16, depending on the order that you wrote them. And number 6 has a similar idea, but it's not as complicated. You just have the option for the article the. And town hall is the correct answer. So if you don't include the, you have 2 words, town hall. If you do include the, you have your 3-word limit. Perfect. So see how this was quite an excellent question for us. It was already in our outline format. I hope you get a question type similar to this in your exam because it's very nice and organized. And I hope you were able to realize just how important these question words and keywords were before we actually listened to the listening prompt. This is why the preparation work is so important. All right, let's go ahead and wrap up this lesson with a nice review. All right, so first off, let's look at things that you should be sure to do. Like I just said, be sure to utilize your time wisely. 20 seconds goes by quickly. Today we took things a bit slow just to make sure we were clear, but really focus on using steps 1, 2, and 3. So reading the question, underlining the keywords, and understanding the question words all together. Also remember the order for the short answer questions. They'll most likely come in order. And follow your section notes. Now, your section will dictate the type of note you take for this question type. Today we were in section 2, and we used a great outline system. Before you come to the exam and in your studying, make sure that you study up on question words, especially the tricky ones like what and which, how many, and how much. This will save you time on the exam. And lastly, since it's the short answer question type, be sure to write clearly and legibly and follow the correct instructions when writing your answers. Lastly, these are things you should avoid. So don't do these things. Do not waste time. So you saw how the keywords and the question words really helped us prepare for the listening prompt. You always want to prepare. Don't focus on one thing. You want to save and maximize your time. So read and underline and think all at the same time and multitask. This might seem difficult now, but with more practice, you can definitely do this within your 20-second limit. Don't get confused over the tricks. Now, the tricks I'm talking about would be the indefinite articles in your answers or the words like public that we saw for public library. Just keep in mind that you want to keep your answer within the limit. So don't get confused over whether or not to include the indefinite articles. Just make sure you're answering your question within the limit. And with that being said, don't leave anything blank and don't write the incorrect amount of words. This is linked with this point here. If writing an extra word will put you over the word limit, make sure you don't do that. And for things that are pretty difficult, and if you just can't get the answer, just try something based on your keywords and based on the prompt. The worst thing you can do is leave it blank because then you really have 0 chance of getting any points. All right, that was quite a whirlwind